Everybody, welcome to Sounding Off. Today's guest is multi-instrumentalist Gary Husband. He is known as a drummer from many, many records, and he's also known as a pianist and keyboardist. And it's very unusual to find somebody that is on the top level of both instruments or of multiple instruments, which we're going to talk about today a lot. So welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Rick, for the introduction. Although it sounds like he's talking about somebody else.
Absolutely not. Speaking of that, when you started, I imagine, with classical piano lessons probably, right?
Yeah, I did, but reluctantly because I was being introduced to big band music on a regular basis because my dad was like a part of a BBC staff orchestra in the north of England where I come from. And they were called the Northern Dance Orchestra, and this was like my induction into sort of session protocol, recording situation, studio protocol. When that light goes on, you don't make a sound, you don't even move in your chair. And I got introduced to the whole realm there was 16 or 17 guys, musicians, all performing at the same time together, going for a take, and it was usually immaculate, And it's quite something to come from that and see what you see in modern times. But
oh yeah, nowadays,
yeah.
you don't ever have to play it right.
No.
Unfortunately, for music, that is.
I know the stock answer. Well, you have Pro Tools, don't you? And yeah. Another world.
Did your dad bring you to sessions all the time?
Yeah, I pretty much got raised sort of, just watching and being a part of that momentary thing that was the thing of recording and making broadcasts, that they were doing at that time. And paralleling that, I was sort of getting introduced with what I thought, in the sort of late 60s and early 70s as being commonplace electric music. Now, I was listening to Tony Williams' Lifetime, thinking this was commonplace, creative electric music, contemporary stuff. This is what it is. Having no awareness of the fact that this was actually something once in a lifetime, so to speak.
Right.
Excuse the. And that was actually changing music at that time. Apart from this, there were lots of alternative influences in music, and diverse influences of music that were permeating my whole perception of everything that meant something to me. And really the crux of it was, if it means something and it speaks to me, then it's got to be worth something. It is a valuable jewel. And this would be my kind of yardstick, along with a lot of classical music. But when I started with classical piano, I became exposed to this world of vengeance and competition, and insistence that you have to be concert platform pianist potential, so that I could be somehow, enter a competition and compete against other students and all this, which was like, what is that? But at the same time, with my wise father's insistence, a classical piano technique is secondary to nothing.
Yes.
If he said it, it was true, as far as I was concerned. And I quickly became aware that when you spend months on end playing a C scale and crushing your thumb underneath your middle finger, your second finger, to go to the F, but your palm doesn't move because there's a coin on it, and if you go to the next lesson and you can't do this little transition with your thumb underneath without that coin falling off, you get hit in the back of the hand with a cane. Hey.
The old days.
School of piano. Man. I mean, it was something. And, this was sheer purgatory, I have to tell you. But the music never stopped affecting me. And, that was always the winner.
So when was the transition to drums then, after the classical piano lessons?
The transition to drums was brought about through a necessity to break free of this world of classicalness. And, I have to say nothing of this should reflect badly on the teacher. Actually, she was a very highly thought of teacher, and still is apparently, master of classical piano technique, I should say, because this was the overriding value. And what it gave me, spending months and months and months playing like C scale at tempos like this, simultaneously,
Right.
And months, man. It's enough to drive you insane. But something takes place that I realized in that. There was some kind of Zen-like thing that took over. Through playing something that slowly, I began to realize this almost unbelievable experience of unlimited strength and power, as if that I could go outside and lift a car. And it was kind of brought about by this not retention, but it was kind of what you'd build up in reserve through playing something that slowly for that long. So it was a very, very kind of an early induction into spirituality, if you like, almost,
Sure.
Very Zen-like. To cut the long story short, it's the technique that stayed with me, kind of, and it's a good job because I don't have an instrument in the house, so it's something I can keep refreshing and keep intact, throughout. Even though years of drumming have changed what was once a very good technique into something manageable, but as long as I can get some kind of message.
How much did your playing of, playing a chording instrument inform you on things like drum tuning?
I think the drum tuning came about and the kind of tuning I prefer. You remember Stuart Copeland of the Police, right?
Yeah, of course.
If you listen to IOU and you listen to that first tom, my 12x8 Gretsch, beautiful drum kit that was, tom, you'll hear that it's pretty much cranked up, and I'm playing a combination of head and rim. So I'm doing like a rim shot on that thing to make it really
sing.
It's got a pop to it too.
Yeah.
Being a Gretsch drum, it's got such a and with drums of that standard and of that character, somehow if you hit in a certain way, you can get so much from it. So that was Stuart right there, for instance, and actually that was the drum on the kit that followed on subsequent recordings with Allan. I had a slightly larger set from Tama, which featured a smaller high tom. I think it was a 10. Mm-hmm. No, a 12, I think. But it was really cranked. So it was almost like a timbale, for the drummers. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
it's like almost higher tuning, tension-wise, than the snare drum even. And Alan used to call this the Fred drum. And if you realize the story behind it, you remember, of course, the Flintstones.
Sure.
From our generation, when Fred Flintstone used to start running and Barney Rubble next to him, there was this little sound, so there was this kind of sonority to the way I used to crank that drum, and so this became known as the Fred Flintstone drum, particularly if you played kind of fast figures on it and stuff. It was always had that association. One of the many crazy stories.
When you would play with Alan and be working on songs on some of the early records, well, I guess on any of the records, when he'd bring in a song to you, how would you guys learn the song? I asked this to Steve Hunt, and I asked it to Jeff Berlin too, and it's fascinating that would Alan just sit down and say, "Here's what I have"? Would he have a demo with a drum, simple drum part.
Yeah, I'd sit down reluctantly. Yeah, this is a very separate animal we're talking about here, and a little hard for me to even talk about him at the moment. But it's
Oh, that's okay. That's fine.
what he would yeah, what he would bring, particularly in the my earliest memories, was what he usually, if anything, he'd give me a recording in advance on a cassette of basically him in the front room with like a live mic and just a foot tap. Now, conceptually, integral to Alan's music, there was often little rubatos inherent in pieces, where it would be a slight little time stretch to certain phrases, or the pause fermata straight after phrases, and I picked up on this right away. And of course, the foot tap corresponded to the next one. Subsequently, he would always explain to people, and people would think, "Oh, it's just Alan being Alan," and they'd say, "What kind of time signatures are being used there?" And he'd say, "Well, everything's in one," and they'd go, "Oh, that's Alan being Alan." But you know what? That's actually how he heard it. He heard beat one as the first one that began as a kind of recapitulation to the original tempo. So there'd be a kind of slight pause or a slight little rush, a slight little accelerando into the phrase, and then it'd smooth out and become the tempo again. And at that point was the one for him. Interesting, huh?
Very interesting. Would you, when you're creating your parts and you're incorporating these things, sometimes there would be an extra beat or one less beat, which would turn into odd times, or would you not even think that way?
Well, no, I wouldn't even. Actually, I wouldn't even think it. I just feel it, because I was aware that it was something you couldn't put in a grid. Whereas some musicians are very frustrated with I don't know why, a little uncomfortable with the prospect of trying to conceive the feeling or perceive the feeling of a phrase that isn't in some kind of grid-like tempo that you can actually work out in series of 16th notes or 32nd notes, for instance, and write out, for instance. But for me, it was just enough to feel it, and the one of the many close things that I feel that we had together was this. It felt totally natural to me to have a little rubato and this little thing, a little rallentando, just to that little bit, and then a quick little accelerando, into what became beat one of the continuing next section, back into tempo, so to speak. So, to actually pull these and to interpret them on the drums, why not? So being about musician, isn't it? Just about a musician, and to a large degree, being very improvisational in the realization of it, the execution of the idea and what you do in it. So I could play little things that were similarly out of tempo, but they would have a kind of corresponding thing of when we'd come together again. And this stuff, to a very large, incredibly large degree, was unspoken between us. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize this was closer than anything I could ever possibly know again,
Sure.
No words necessary.
Yeah.
You just play it, and it got stretched. So, oh yeah, that's stretched. Da, 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 da. If you listen to The Things I See, for instance, sorry, The Things You See, that's his song. You hear, da, 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 da.
Right.
You hear where they are placed?
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. Dun, 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 dun. Okay?
Yeah.
That's from many years of knowing exactly where he instinctively puts those accents. And you can't write them. You just have to feel them. And click track, not
Never.
really.
Never, right?
So it was like you say, and I've said on your many very interesting and enlightening interviews, Rick, that he really did have a contemporary kind of classical, at least, you know, influence. No, you know, he had a whole kind of realization of that side of music, at least what he'd heard, you know, and as big a separatist as he was and as unique as he was, he had his influences. I mean, you go back to Sand. You remember the track Sand? I'm not sure if you can call it that. There's like a chorus to it.
Right.
It's Elgar. It's Enigma Variations.
Yeah.
Day, da, 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 day, yeah, da, da. Unbelievable, huh?
I say it. He was a rock musician that was an improviser like John Coltrane who played over contemporary classical music.
Yeah.
I mean that's the only. Yeah. It was a melding of styles that had never been seen before, and I don't know if it will ever be seen in that way again. It's so unique. No. And I think the part that gets lost to people is the I mean, people realize the harmonic complexities and beauty in his music, but there's also the rhythmic aspect of it and the jazz element to it, the improvisational element to it, and how sophisticated it was just to improvise over those kind of the types of chord progressions that he used, and the tempo variations like you're talking about is very much like contemporary classical music, like an orchestra with the ebbs and flows of the beat.
Try and find somebody to conduct it.
Right. that was you.
Well, I would commend myself on the nights that we came close, not always, because you know, he would be changeable and so would I. But if we could get near this rubato element in the music, I am aware that it used to that was one of the big elements that used to confound a lot of people. Like, what time signature is that? Well, it's just felt, man. It's just a pause. It's just little time expansion and little time compression or whatever. And that's what it was.
On a practical level, since I never walked into a recording studio, I don't think, until the late 80s or so. When you were making records back then, how would go when you made IOU? That was the first record that you played on with him, isn't that right? When you were making the record, would you do a rhythm track with the whole band playing live? How did you make records back then?
Actually, that was surprisingly it was probably one of the only records where we did that features the largest degree of material actually was live. Mm-hmm. His amps were in actually sort of the front of this floating barge, actually quite close to where I live now. Often I go there and look at it. And he actually kept a surprising amount of material that happened of the moment on the sessions. Mm-hmm. And he had at that point he was using these Hartley Thompson cabinets, and was very happy with the sound at that point in time. And he actually kept a lot of what happened. So
that's amazing.
I have a stark memory of it. Only on IOU. There was not a single one that followed where he'd do that. But we had actually been playing for around at least 2 years, maybe more, before that album became recorded. No, what am I talking about? A year. Maybe 14 months, something like that. Before that album came about, you know, was recorded. And it was actually recorded in sort of 1980. It wasn't until 1982 when we had to escape this country because we couldn't work here. And when we did work, we couldn't get paid. That's why the band was called IOU. And you know, we were just so used to this meager existence. With it was the most precious jewel to each one of us. This whole thing, and yet it was totally unremarkable to just about everybody. Unfortunately, you know, and we even had a little anecdote. We played at a place called the Rock Garden, which used to exist in Covent Garden here in London, and we were basically a rock venue.
Right.
And we'd gone on and started playing our first tune, and the promoter for the gig, or the club owner, or whatever, or the front of house engineer came running on stage, going like, "Stop, stop!" And when we like, "What?" He got us to stop, and he said, "Guys, do you not realize the people are in?" We thought we were just warming up or playing some random thing. Anyway, so much for perception.
Oh, no. Jeez.
Yeah, so it's not until we came to America in 1982 that this album became known to people, because we was able to just press up vinyl copies and sell them at the shows.
Okay, what about the state of music that is art music, like that sophisticated music? Where are we now in 2017 versus where we were in 1982?
That's a good question. Deserves a good answer, but we're in a different place for sure, I think. I kind of have my own feelings on it, personal feelings.
That's what I want to know about.
What I hear predominantly in just about everybody, and I think it's a lot to do with, it corresponds directly to the times we're in and the mediums that we use and are exposed to every day, is that I see the most unbelievable proficiency that I could ever conceive seeing. Unbelievable. I mean, I can't believe the proficiency of people, how fast they can play, what they can master, what they can drummers like of speed that I never thought possible. But there's a whole lot I'm missing, Rick.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds like a very old school thing to say. I'm seeing a lot in recent days my name associated with this term old school. Oh, that old school guy. It's like, oh, really? When did I become that? You know, that's kind of interesting.
That's a good thing.
But I don't. When the whole thing was, you'd sit in a room with the lights off and listen to Stravinsky's Mass or whatever it might be. Bartok quartets, string quartets, or whatever. And you have this emotion coming out of you, like being moved to tears literally by music like that, as powerful as that. That's pretty much my yardstick, Rick, and I kind of sense that in you too.
Yeah. From
what I know of you and your achievements and the stuff that the amazing stuff that you're doing, I know. So,
I mean, the two references that you just made say it all. I mean, that says it all. I mean,
well, Bartok was an old friend since, probably not in their wisdom. I got sent away with these sort of first, early level Microcosmos series. Mm-hmm. Which were unbelievable for, as you know, of course, your independence. So that these were unbelievable exercises for that. But more resonating to me was this introduction into bitonality that they were definitely in there.
Yeah.
And they were haunting me. And I mean, I was like, how can that be? I was just waiting for some professor, musicologist to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's a false relation. Can't use that," and whatever else, and all these things that I'd become exposed to in terms of of education, and suddenly I was engrossed in this wild universe of Mr. Bartok. It was quite something. So I don't know where we were with that, but I think that basically every experience you go through stays with you, particularly and along with that, every musical experience stays with you and becomes somehow part of what you do. For example, in my case, I was playing in a big band at age 16, playing drums, and there are a lot of balances to meet with that. The overall level. There was no PA in this kind of scale we had now. No monitors. Very often, no bass amp, and the piano even wasn't even being fed through any kind of PA. And these people needed to be able to project on a piano. You read Bill Evans' stories about this, and how he managed to find a way to project without hitting hard. It was a particular kind of thing that he had to cultivate, and he did it along with lots of other people of the eras before and that era. But with drums, you have lead trumpet players right here, just behind you. So for a drummer, this is extraordinary. You got lead trumpet players, and they usually pretty feisty characters,
Right.
Since you play how you are, invariably, I do believe these guys 9 times out of 10 ahead of the beat, whatever. There's something in particularly lead trumpet, and you've got this first and foremost in your ear. Down here to your front left, you have like a trombone section where there's a kind of lazy attack on those, and invariably those hit the back of the hall, and you hear that really late. The same with the saxophones, but not so distinct. And it's basically you and the bass. Like, okay, what I have to realize here is I have to center this music. I have to play in the center of it, so that all these people somehow use me as the same reference point. And that's kind of what I had to learn. And I learned that through recording, of course, through listening to all the great drummers, and which I did relentlessly. I know you've done a video on this, and it's very enlightening, Rick. But and how important it is. So this was a real great original exercise. But going back to what I was saying, the attack of what I was doing had to be clear and precise. And I remember having to kind of cultivate a way to be able to play in a way that was authoritative, first and foremost. Mm-hmm. This is the authority. Even if I'm wrong, I am the center of this, and you play to me. Not easy for a 16-year-old.
No.
Is this kid on drums? I mean, I said, I don't care. I've got the gig. You just play with me or whatever. But I'm gonna find this, and you're gonna play to me. Sorry. and really becoming aware that you had to have that kind of conviction as a drummer. So this is one of the first things I learned, and that stayed with me. Same as every other experience and demand and every other thing I had to cultivate along the way. They stay with you, and I'm so happy because I feel so enriched and of course benefited by all these marvelous lessons, and to have learned them firsthand in that way.
From the people that I've interviewed, I believe it was Victor Wooten that said a similar thing. A lot of people have said similar things about, you'll see young kids on YouTube playing these things that they never thought possible. But what they don't have, what they can never take, they could copy a person's playing, but they can never copy their life experience. And that's really what makes you who you are as a musician. It doesn't matter how fast you can play or how, these unbelievable feats of technical prowess that kids have.
Yeah.
These experiences of playing in a big band at 16 or listening to the Bartok string quartets, all these experiences of that you had and of listening to really eclectic music, this huge variety of music early on in your life has shaped everything that you've done in your musical career.
I believe so. Yeah. for the better.
For the better.
For the better.
Yeah.
And, you know, simultaneously, your perception. You don't have to read Huxley books on philosophy books or books on perception or whatever to realize how beneficial it is to really embrace such a wide range of music. And if you like it, I mean, I have to keep going back, you know, to these really early lessons. But my father was predominantly a classical musician with a great love of jazz, but he didn't have the courage to improvise. He couldn't commit to one idea. To solo. So I used to write solos for him. Some good, some okay, you know. But he'd play them, you know, verbatim, note for note.
That's great.
Lesson. And my mother, who's still with us, happy to say, was a fantastic dancer and stuff. So she had all this exuberance. So I would get to hear on a regular basis singers, great singers, though. Among which my favorites would be, I don't know if you remember names like Lena Horne.
Of course.
Electrifying singer. Oh,
amazing.
My God, she would. The hairs on my back. The emotion and the commitment in what she did, what was behind that voice. Oh my God. Of course, Frank Sinatra, a lot of Frank Sinatra, who, and through all these great singers, and I still hear great singers, was the realization and a very early lesson for me that every note counts. Every single note. Where you put it, how much you emphasize it, how much you might ghost it, or, you know, proclaim it in some kind of way. Every single note and how you shape it matters. And I learned this from Alan too. Despite the complexity of his expression, was really remarkable to become aware of that way of playing so early in my life, you know. And just going back to him, he was the original guy that kind of set me free, really, as an improviser, and made it possible for me to start improvising and developing as an improviser.
He really, beyond his technical abilities, his ability to shape one note, it was amazing. And it didn't matter. It always impressed me that Alan would change equipment every record. He'd be playing some new rig, and it always sound like him. Always, it was always in the hands.
So obsessive.
Yeah,
completely.
And I always think, like, how can he get this sound out of all this different gear? It always sounds like Alan. It was unbelievable. But his conception of tone and how to shape a note, how to shape a phrase, was so unique. And it's all through him. I also learned how to shape what you do directly in a personal way, and to have, you know, like he would say things like, you know, you if you can see a road, you form that road, you further it, and you keep going down it. Like it doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter if nobody likes it, you know, it doesn't matter what one person says, it's not relevant. If you believe that, you go that way, you know. And I knew that he was the kind of man he was, intrinsically loving, you know, and he loved and suffered very violently. He was of drastic, humongous emotional extremes and complexities, and this very much shaped what he did. He wanted one note to say it all, and he couldn't help but put it where he so acutely and raw and in a raw sense felt it, and it was all about feeling for him, despite how convoluted and how complex his phrases and improvisational developments are, both on paper and to listen to. You always knew this, always, you know, it was always what that note was meant to say, you know. And
These are things I'll carry forever, you know, in his legacy, glorious legacy.
Do you ever think that there will be wide acceptance of progressive music, you know, whether it's fusion or jazz or modern classical music again? I mean, I don't know if there ever was, but there certainly was 30 years ago, much more than today. Will it be cyclical? Will it somehow come back into vogue that people listen to music, art music again?
I don't know. I often wonder that maybe we'd only find that out if we took it away. But it's so commonplace. We have to see how there's not only the devaluation of you know, in terms of you know, how we can't sell anything anymore to in a way it's become increasingly harder to support ourselves in this endeavor. But the fact that you know, from the moment you wake up if you're in the city like this, music everywhere. You know, if you're in a hotel, you only have to go as far as the lift, the elevator.
Right.
There's music coming. You get into a reception, different set of music. You go outside, you go into Starbucks, different set of music. You go into a clothes shop, another set of music. And it's like, God damn it, you know. and
You can't get away from it.
I become actually blind and deaf to it.
Yeah.
After a while, and have to kind of tune it out because it's just, I'd like to change, you know, tune into music and savor music for all that it can give to me. And we go back to the little guy with the record player and the lights off, tuning into those old masters, classical masters, and really from beginning to end, you go the distance and you stay with that thing, and it says what it was written to say, and it accumulates in the way it was written to accumulate, and it hopefully it affects you in a way that moves you and enriches you in such a great sense, a beneficial sense, in an ultimately positive sense, you know, and whether people really have the time with this kind of split second, you know, concentration,
Attention span, lack of attention span.
Yeah, and it's every second there's something. People are looking at the phones. You know, there's somewhere they've got to be. There's somewhere, you know, somebody trying to call you. But they're trying to call you at the same time. And oh my God! So the pace of life, I wouldn't say is exactly conducive to it. But I would along the path that you very well involve yourself in there, Rick, in the speaking and the great information you're putting out about valuable aspects of pertaining to musical value, its real intrinsic value, then I think we have to kind of re-educate. And it's great to see you doing that, and I would love to become involved in certain principles that apply to piano playing or drumming, in a way that would benefit somebody to believe in themselves a whole lot more, in order to see that, to become closer with that kind of ideology.
Now, when you're out touring, how would you say your time is split as far as keyboards versus drums with the people that you play with? I know with when you're playing out with Mahavishnu, you're playing keyboards.
Yeah, predominantly, yeah. With the recordings, the albums, I have a little bit more activity on the drums, but for the live shows, I actually get up a couple of times and we do some drum conversation in the pieces, and yeah. So, but insofar as your question, it's probably 50-50, which is, thank you God, exactly what I intended it. Because I had so much resistance when I was younger. Like, you cannot be this multi-instrumentalist. You have to decide what you're going to do. People have to know what you do, first and foremost. So, okay, do I have to say I'm a drummer, but I also play keyboards? That doesn't matter. You're a drummer. Okay. So people have got that, or vice versa. I'm a pianist or I'm a composer. or whatever, and this was really instilled in me a long time ago by both peers and contemporaries. Actually, it's like this is why you won't work. And I will go, well, I'm not going to give up development on one instrument just to please this school of thought that has determined that only people who in any type of profile play only one instrument.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't my case,
Yeah.
As you probably know, both of my instruments sort of work and develop and have evolved on a simultaneous kind of plane. So they're both very much live and sort of evolving that way together. But the two of them, it isn't split between. There's no split. It's just the two of them make a whole.
My friends that when I told them I was interviewing you today, their question was, I said, what should I ask him? And all of my friends have said, how can you be so good on more than one instrument? That was their thing. Like, how can you be so accomplished as a drummer and a pianist on the level of the top level? I mean, that is really, unfathomable to me. When I interviewed Steve Vai, Steve said to me, he said, if I couldn't play guitar, I can't play any other instruments. I can't play the drums. I can't play anything. And I was laughing about that. And I thought, that sounds like me. Even though I play the keyboards and I play the guitar mainly, and I was a classical bass major in college and everything, and I play everything else. I play functionally because I have to play in sessions. But to get out there and play with John McLaughlin and play keyboards or play drums with Alan Holdsworth or all the different people that you've played with over the years. How do you play on such a high level? How do you keep your chops? How much do you practice? Do you practice?
Surprisingly little.
Okay.
Sorry to shatter any. I actually don't. At least not physically. There's music and I allow for invention to be coming through me all the time. So I feel things evolving. I'm planning. I'm structuring. I'm putting together things that the next time I go to that particular instrument or that particular medium, I'm going to be able to manifest in some way. And I'm kind of used to doing that because I never really had anywhere to practice, particularly drums. I envy these guys with this, these perfectly, perfect playing situations with the garage right next to the drums, and it's all soundproof, and they do all these drum tracks there, and it's right next door to the kitchen, And I think, oh man, that must be so cool to be able to just be in music all the time, but also be at home.
See, Gary, I have this huge studio here, and I have 10 drum sets, and I can't play a beat at all. So, so there you go. I mean, I could barely play. I could piece together a drum part. That's about it, with about 10 takes and some beat detecting. If I were to ask you, okay, who are your top 5 drummers and top 5 piano players that you grew up listening to or that you love to listen to?
Yeah. Oh, if you were to ask me that, are you asking me that?
I'm asking you that.
Okay.
Who were your influences on the drums, and who were your influences on the piano?
Okay, well, drums. There was one figure that stood out that a lot of people won't be aware of in terms of his name, and his name was Baron John von Allan.
Okay.
And he played with Stan Kenton Orchestra in 1972, and he had such a celebration of this power, this unbelievable higher level in music, this real majesty, this unbelievable thing, and you could see visibly that the spirit took him, and he would just, I mean, he was a kind of good, striking-looking guy too. So I mean, he was, giving it the moves and stuff. But he felt and lived by every single beat Again, every single note matters.
Yeah.
And the way he put the drama in that music, you could see it was exactly what Kenton wanted, of course, being the kind of artist he was. And in 1972, I saw that broadcast, and that's what helped me decide. Yeah, that's what I want to do, and that's what I want to do with that instrument.
Right.
I want to make people feel like this guy just made me feel. Very simple. So John Von Ohlen, people like Buddy Rich, it was fantastic and so exciting and exhilarating to listen to people like this and or his technique. But in actual fact, I had more favorite big band drummers. There was a guy called Ronnie Zito who used to play with Woody Herman's band in the 60s, who was really something. There was also a big band drummer here called Ronnie Verrill. He used to play on lots of records well before my time, but I got to know him later. It's pretty hard to keep it at 5.
Keep going.
I responded. I mean, I had a great love for Keith Moon, you know, who was really didn't have any kind of technique, but it was all about what he would do, how he would do it, and when he would do it, and how he was uniquely qualified to make that music with the Who happen.
Unbelievable, really.
In a way that nobody else could.
No, nobody could ever play parts like that and make them work in songs like that. I don't even know how they work, but they work so perfectly.
He dies, book closed. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, amazing. That powerful. And what kind of technique? Nothing.
Right.
You know? It's just soul to drums to out. You know?
Yeah.
Where's the message? And so, you know, and visibly, because I was attracted to the way people were charismatic on the instruments too. So, of course, this was really amazing to see him. The Ellington drummers, the Basie drummers, of course, Billy Cobham. I saw him on his first TV broadcast. At this point, I missed Mahavishnu, unfortunately. But I saw Billy Cobham 1973 or 4 on television. And realized, oh my God, everything about what he was doing, it was like, oh my God, it was one of the most exciting things I'd ever seen. And I used to try to figure, of course, well after the fact, we had no video recorder, not even a tape recorder at that point in my life. So I had to go by everything I received in that moment and just sort of remain with the essence of what I'd seen and think that this was somehow, you know, maybe this was kind of close to it, or,
right,
you know, somehow stir something, and necessarily have to use your own imagination to come up with something that caught onto a little bit of that essence that he was putting across. So that was one, and then I, through a friend I'll never stop thanking, I discovered Tony Williams. And firstly, on a lot of older records with from the Miles Quintet, and I realized this kind of broad stroke artistry, a conception. I realized that nothing had happened quite like that before in terms of how this was all being incredibly widened and visual in terms of what he was doing, and in terms of structure of what he would leave out, you know. And when you want to find out the most about people and you haven't got the internet, as we didn't, I'd look at interviews, and one of this most pertinent thing he said was, I don't play the bass drum on 103, and I don't play the hi-hat on 2 and 4. I want to play the bass drum where it means something. And that became my mantra. You know, just a little detail such as that said from the authority of someone who's actually doing it, who's actually being this amazing visionary and inventor and revolutionary with an instrument. So I would take things like that, and he just became my everything for, and still is really. There was a guy who played with McCoy Tyner, Eric Gravatt. I'm not sure if you know him. He played in Early Weather Report and on mid-70s McCoy Tyner albums. Oh, what an exciting player. Jack DeJohnette, Narada Michael Walden. Have I got to 5 yet? Uh,
15.
oh man, we could go on all day with that one. Piano players,
Yes, piano
short
players.
story. Bill Evans. Why? Because my piano teacher threw my beloved copy of Bill Evans at Town Hall across the room and called him an imposter and a charlatan. Pretty interesting. When she
Wow.
asked me, what do you listen to when you're not involved in serious music? And I brought the album, I said, this. Thinking that, she would hear the Ravellian qualities, she would hear the purity of his perfectly formed and evolving harmony. And the charm of those show tunes, which he kept the integrity of so perfectly and wonderfully, never anything superfluous, and I loved that about Bill. And he was left-handed too, so I mean, it gave me a whole perspective on how much the left hand could be as strong as the right. So really, Bill Evans for sure. Jan Hammer, because of his former Czechoslovakian meets New York, kind of beautiful merging. The discipline in him. There's another one where every note mattered, really, along with Bill, I feel. And of course, all the regular guys, but I shouldn't say something to cheapen anybody, but there are a lot of incredible guys out there. But I'm not a great fan of piano, believe it or not. I do get pianoitis quite quickly. Yeah.
Have you discovered anything new? What are you listening to? Something old?
Yeah, I'm listening. I listen to a lot of old. I listen to a lot of Miles, because it's like I put that on and we make Italian food here and we listen to Miles.
Sounds
really
great.
That's the best kind of evening for me.
That sounds great.
But we're also listening to the new Arto Lindsay record. I'm not sure about this guy, the Brazilian guy. Very much a kind of art edge to what he does, contemporary thing. And I love the approach. Whoever's playing keyboards, or the programmer stroke producer, there's some wonderful things happening in some of those songs on this new album. There's an English band with it's an instrumental band called 3-Track Tigers.
I don't know
that are very subtly bringing in this kind of 80s kind of shine on a more kind of indie kind of thing. It's very interesting, and what they're putting together and the form of what they do. I'm really liking it. It's very creative, unlike anything I've heard. So I'm searching all the time. I am open to whatever I can find, really. I got a lot of CDs here. What are they? CDs. Funny, the records with Allan, the subsequent records to IOU, they were all. There was a studio in Costa Mesa called Front Page, and a lot of those albums were done there on an absolute shoestring. And Allan would give me these little demos the day before, and we go to Charlie's Chili place and listen to them. And in that morning during the setup, I'd be, as he wished me to do, I'd create kind of a beat. What can you do? What can you do with that? What can you do with that? And I would just relish meeting that challenge. It was just like, please be creative with this. Find something to do on it. And so as a result, I was able to really stretch imagination and come up with something that was kind of a little bit like a counter composition to where he'd do things. And that's where a lot of those beats came from, and they literally be invented in the morning of the session.
Wow.
And yeah, as was the sound. I mean, we spent 10 minutes, 15 minutes getting a sound max. So, the drums would just go in, set up, run the tune, down it, play. First, and everything on those records is like first, second, very outside, maybe third take of something. So, but warts and all, I'm proud of the creative process. But majorly, just to say, this was all tape. Up until I think it was Wardenclyffe Tower was the first. So we're well into the 80s now. This is like late around. Can't remember if that came after Secrets or not.
I think it did.
But from that point, yeah, I remember it was DDD all the way.
Gary, I appreciate you talking to me so much.
Thank you for the invitation, Rick.
I'd like to thank Gary for being my guest this week and remind you to subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel and hit the notification button to let you know when the next Sounding Off video is coming out. Thanks for watching.